I had a few questions about what glue I use to do this. This is the one that I use. Gorilla Glue makes a bunch of different glues. This one they call premium, but I haven't been able to find one that's not premium, unless it's something different like white or Gorilla Glue, Super Glue, or something completely different. But anyway, this one just seems to be called Gorilla Glue. The 3-hour cure is quite accurate, I find, and it's nice and hard after 3 hours, which is great because if you're doing repeated gluing on the same piece, so you need to glue, I'm going to glue this together, the halves together, and then I'm going to want to do something else on it. So you're only looking at 3 hours between those individual gluing, so you can do 3 or 4, maybe even 5, I guess, if you stay up late or whatever, in one day. And it's quite quick, quite easy to use. Hey, we've got some visitors. What are you doing? Get out of my yard, you kids. For places where you don't want the glue to stick, I use this baking paper, which is really great. The Gorilla Glue just hardens up and then you can just pluck it off. And I've been using this piece of paper over and over as my palette, if you like. Just squirt some glue on there and then use a propeller blade or one of those squeegee things to spread it around. And yeah, I've been using this for months. It also works quite well for the epoxy as well. Epoxy doesn't stick to it. The only thing that slightly kind of sticks to it is super glue or CA, but even then it's not really that sticky. So I really like this stuff. On the last 2 planes, I put this little thin piece of plywood under the front of the plane like that, and the main reason that I thought to do that was because when I cut the middle out of this middle slice, it became very, very soft and bendy, and I was a little bit worried about that. So that's the reason I thought to do it, but it turns out that it's probably not really necessary, because I found that when you glue everything back together, all the slices together, that bendiness just goes right away, although it's probably helped because of this as well. So it seems to be working well, so I'm just going to do it again, and it can't hurt to have a little bit more reinforcement. Like as we saw with the last plane, you may be in for quite a few heavy landings. Well, this little channel in the tail, I'm a little bit worried that the glue might puff out inside here and sort of block the wires, and I want to keep it nice and clear because it's a real pain in the ass if you're trying to poke wires down here and there's something in the way that you can't poke them through. But anyway, this hopefully should not stick in there because I put some of that baking paper around it like that, so here's hoping that works. It's now about 35, maybe 40 minutes since I started applying the glue, and it's starting to get quite stiff, but you can still sort of move things around. And the nice thing about this time is that when you put it somewhere, it'll stay there pretty much because the glue is no longer runny. And if you want to get things perfectly lined up like these seams here without getting glue all over your fingers, you just put some packing tape on it like this, and then you can sort of run your finger along and feel if it's nicely lined up. And of course the packing tape will hold it still while it's drying. You don't really want to put tape all the way along the seam because this glue seems to need air to dry. I've tried it in the past where I just taped up the whole seam and it took forever to dry, and I ended up pricking little pinpricks all the way down the seam to let a little bit of air get into it. But just a bit of tape every now and then, like I have there, maybe you can see, seems to be the best way to go, and that gives you little points to pick it up and hold it without getting your fingers all sticky. If you do get your fingers all sticky, I find the best thing to do is just sort of quickly get a tissue, like before it starts to really harden up, of course, and just sort of really aggressively wipe it off like that. And like if you're in the middle of the job, that is, keep going. When you finish the job and you want to wash your hands, I actually find that if you do that thing with the tissue, wipe it really hard, quickly, I can still feel it a little bit, but it's not really enough to bother me. I'd probably just leave it like that. But if there is a little bit too much on there, don't wash your hands with water. I find that's not a good idea, because this glue says something about water helps it to cure or something like that. By the way, some people like to spray a little bit of water on the glue before they put the piece on. I've never bothered with that, although I have breathed on it a little bit just so that the moisture from my breath helps it to start curing. But most of the time I forget to do that. I didn't do it this time. And to be honest, I haven't really noticed any difference, so I wouldn't really bother with doing that. Anyway, so water is not a good idea to wash your hands with, but I find that Terps, mineral turpentine, is pretty good. And also this hand cleaner thing that I got, which is, I think it's made for mechanics. They get their hands filthy when they're working on a car engine or something. And then they have this really grease-cutting hand cleaner stuff that works really well. But it smells just like Terps. So I think Terps would be just as good as this stuff. Okay, I have the first 3 slices all stuck together now, so this will give you an idea of how it's all going to look inside. Seems to be going fairly well so far. I've been going a little bit sparing on the glue because I'm going to be putting fiberglass on the outside, so hopefully shouldn't need to be, I mean, it's not going to be this glue that's holding it all together only by itself. So what I'm aiming for is this sort of situation where the glue is just starting to sort of puff through the gap, and this here is not quite what I want. There's a little bit too much glue there, and also in one of these gaps here you've got to be careful because there's a little bit too much glue puffing out from the side there. It's still enough to get the strap through though, which is what that's for. These little pieces of plastic on there, by the way, they're just to help the strap slide through, because this whole area, when it's finished, it's kind of awkward to get your fingers in there. So you don't want the strap to be going in and then sort of getting stuck, and you just really annoying when that happens. So that's why I've also cut little wedges out of the side there. And the front strap here, you don't really want that to be any further forward than the front of where your hatch is, like this. Otherwise you're going to be trying to put your fingers through here to get the strap tight, which would drive me crazy, I'm sure. That's the mini talon is like that. There's a huge space forward of the hatch there, which is just sort of really annoying to try and deal with that. What else was I going to show you? Oh, the gouging out of the back piece. I went a little bit heavy, or a little bit deep in some places, so you can see the light shining through there, maybe. Can you see that? Where are we? Well, you can sort of see the light shining through there, and that's because this back side is all curved and it's sort of tapering in there. Fortunately, I didn't bust all the way through, and I still have enough room to sand a little bit further on that side. What I could have done, I went 1.5 centimetres in, so that's halfway through the 3 centimetres of foam. What I could have done if I wanted to be a little bit more fancy about it is I could have marked out this shape here, which is the shape where the foam is always going to be 3 centimetres thick. And I could have marked that on here, and then I would have been able to go, say, 2 centimetres deep in that area if I really wanted to remove more foam and make it more lightweight, but I just stuck with the 1.5. What else was I going to look at here? This goes in here, so oops. So I'm trying something a little bit different here. I thought I'd make it so that the front of the hatch can't really be pushed up like that, well, without the back coming out. So you're going to have to lift the back a little bit first in order to be able to pull that way. That's the idea. It's turned out a little bit loose, I think, but hopefully it'll be alright. And I found that with the first Skyhunter plane, once I glued the second side on, it was really tight and a bit tricky to shove this in. But that turns out to be a good thing, because you don't need any further sort of fastening to hold it in while you're flying, and it's quite secure. These blobs of glue that squeezed out on the outside of the plane are kind of a nuisance to get rid of, because they're very hard compared to the foam. So sanding them is tricky. You've got to be really careful that you're only sanding the glue and not the foam to the side of it. So what I do in most cases is, if there's enough of it sticking up, I'll just chop it off with a blade like that, and then there'll be less sanding to do. Or in lucky situations like this bit here, when you get sort of a spherical blob like that, you can often just pluck it off. Hopefully I won't ruin, yeah. And you get quite a nice flat seam there, like that. But it doesn't work with long pieces like that. You can't do that with very well. You'll end up gouging out a chunk of the foam that you didn't want to. This bit here, by the way, I purposely put a little bit more glue than normal on this part, because this is going to have to be a fairly solid area to hold the motor mount in and everything. This is a bit tricky to show because in the video it looks much wetter than it really is, because I have to get it so that the light's shining on it from the other way so that you can see what I mean at all. But anyway, it's not quite as wet as it looks. But the point is that the whole surface is covered with glue, but then I've scraped it off so that there's no sort of puddles, or there's a sort of a blob right there, which is a little bit more than I was intending. But yeah, just don't leave any blobs sitting on there. A little bit more there maybe, I don't know. And I find that this, because there's less glue there, when you put the next piece on, it doesn't slide around so much. So it gets to a stiff point, or a point where it sort of sticks, it stays where you put it quicker than it would if there was more glue there. Plus you just don't want that extra weight anyway. So anyway, that's how I do it. There's the other piece there. And like I say, with this glue, you don't really have to rush. I could probably leave this sitting here for another 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes if I was risking it. But oh, look at it. It looks really wet there because of the light, but it's not. So to line up these two slices here, I've just got my 4 pieces of tape, and I'm just sort of going like this, positioning them, using my fingers to feel how smooth these transitions feel, and checking it maybe every now and then with one of these, just to make sure that it's not wildly off position. Oh, that's not very good. Oh, that's a bit tight. I don't know why. Yeah, one of the problems at this point I start to realize is that I don't get any global alignment here. I'm only getting a local alignment between this slice and this slice, which is not too great because the wing spar is going in here, and we want that to be nice and perfectly 90 degrees to this whole arrangement in there. But anyway, once you've got it to what seems good, then you can just go around and put a few more pieces of tape on, and that should hold it in place while it's drying. And for this particular one, I'm going to put also a large heavy plank of wood on top to hold it down, especially in these middle sections. And I also want to make sure that this piece here, let's show you what I mean. I want to make sure that this line is not bowed out too much, because that's supposed to be holding in my hatch. So if anything, I want this line to sort of bow in a little bit. I actually put this in when I was sticking the first side on, so that this side and the 2 middle pieces will be perfectly straight to each other. But I don't mind if this second one is in a little bit to give me a bit of a squeeze on the hatch. Okay, it's time to glue all the slices of the wing together. You'll have to excuse the noise of the rain on the roof. Can't do anything about that. It's not very loud right now, but it gets really loud sometimes. And yeah, winter has finally arrived, and we've been having some shit weather, and we've got more on the way by the looks of it. Anyway, so I'm going to do these both at the same time, which is generally not advisable. Usually when you're doing something with a new method, you kind of want to do just one side first, so that if you screw it up, you've only screwed up one side instead of both. But I have a pretty good idea how this is going to go now. So I want the bottom of the wing to be perfectly flat, so I'm going to clamp it down like that to dry, and to do that I'm going to put this bit of this old blanket on the trailing edge area here, because some of these slices are a little bit higher than others, and if I just put a piece of wood on there, which is what I'm going to put on top of the blanket, for example here, the wood might just be sitting on this one and it won't be pressing down the one next to it flat to the table. These pieces here, by the way, I've actually thrown away or removed the couple of pieces that were in the middle of that curved section because I didn't like them too much. They were sort of going in and then up again, and they weren't blending in very well here, and I just didn't like the look of them, and I thought if I'm going to go to all the trouble of fiberglassing this, I want it to look nice. Shit.
Oh my goodness.
How did that happen? Well, now we've got to glue that back as well. The trouble is, these are not supposed to be sticking to the aluminium, so I don't really want to plaster Gorilla Glue all down there. So, just get a little bit of that and some packing tape. Fortunately, it does fit back together perfectly like this. Okay, now I have to try and get this 4mm dowel inside there. Pretty sure it should be easy enough because I put it in and out a few times and it was never an issue. But you never know. Right, so we want this to come to about here. Oh man, super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Look at that. Just go straight in. Alright, so hopefully that will have picked up a decent amount of glue on the way through. Alright, well that took about an hour, so it's not exactly the quickest process, but it's fairly simple. The only issue that I get really annoyed with is there seems to be almost no way to avoid getting glue on your fingers. So I've clamped these together just with a screw into the MDF table and a little bit of wood to push them there at the main sort of middle point where, yeah, the best place to put it. And don't forget to put a little piece of baking paper in between that, otherwise you're going to stick that piece of wood to the wing. I don't really like this this method very much. If there's a better way to do this, give me a suggestion. Maybe I'll try that next time. So what I'm going to do now is just wipe off the excess that's sort of poking through here already, and then I'll put the clamping piece of wood and the blanket on top. Okay, everything's sort of clamped down there now. And one last thing you might want to do before you go away and let it dry is just see if there are any slices that are really badly misaligned. I'm not really seeing much on this section here because I did such a good job of the wire cutting there, but on the last plane, no, not the last plane, the first plane, the Sky Hunter plane, these sections here were fairly sort of misaligned, so I just got some foam wedges like this and just sort of poke them under there a little bit to lift up the ones that are a little bit too low. And if you're wondering where to find little foam wedges like this, have a look on the ground underneath where you were doing all your hot wire cutting, and there will be a mountain of them. At least there is in my room. I don't think I'm really going to use much of these sort of wedges this time because I'll let this dry and then I'll be able to sand it nice and smooth afterwards, so probably not going to be an issue this time. I put some in there, but I mean, don't really need them, to be honest. So this is how the wings will attach. It's pretty much the same as the first Sky Hunter style plane, in that we have aluminium tube, and then this dowel is going to go, oops, sorry, let me look at the, there we go. Dowel is going to go inside there, and then the aluminium tube is going to have to squash around the dowel inside the foam there, so you can see there's a little bit of space around it, and you just sort of have to work that tube in and out as many times as it takes until you can push the tube in without having to twist it like that to get it in, because once you put these two pieces in their respective holes here and here, you're not going to be able to twist the wing as it goes on. So anyway, it will go on like that. Around about here it gets quite stiff to push on, and I'm thinking that I might be able to just use that friction to hold the wings on. That's what I did with the Sky Hunter style plane, and it worked fine, surprisingly. So I'll try it again and hopefully it'll work fine again. But anyway, this is going to go all the way into about there, and the two smaller dowels are mainly just to stop the wing from, you know, twisting like that as much. Do you remember what I said about these foam slices, the thickness not being very accurate? If I line up the inside of the wings here and then look at the other end, we've got about 14 millimeters difference, so almost a half a slice difference in length of these wingspan sections. So what I'm going to do here, I've just trimmed off the dowel there, and I'm going to glue another piece on here with no dowel, and I was going to make that another 3 centimeter slice, but I think I might make it 5 centimeters so that I can make these two wings exactly the same length, just trim down that last slice. I also got some questions about this spray adhesive that I've been using. It's called ADOS, and I think it's probably the same as the 3M77 that I hear about. I don't know if we have that 3M77 here in New Zealand. I haven't really looked for it because when I tried this one it seemed to work quite well, so I've just been sticking with it. And I mainly use this for things that are not requiring too much structural rigidity. I mainly use it underneath the packing tape when I'm putting a skin, like on the bottom of the plane or on the wings, as the case for the Sky Hunter style plane. So something where you have a lot of area to cover, and you don't need it to be too strong, and you don't want it to puff up either. That's the other thing. This makes a nice flat glue. And I found, I'll show you on the wing of the Sky Hunter that, hang on, let me go get it. Here we go, isn't she a beauty? So for this one, apart from a little bit of fiberglass on the nose and around the motor mount, I used that glue and packing tape everywhere else that has any covering on it. A lot of places don't have any covering like this in the middle of the fuselage, but that, provided that you sand it down nicely first, it sticks on really well, and it's lasting well too. I'll show you on the bottom a little bit sort of scuffed up, but everywhere that hasn't been, you know, actually physically impacted in some way seems to have remained exactly as I placed it when I put it on there. And so it's on the trailing edge all the way down there, bottom and top. And I also used packing tape for the hinges here, which I don't think I'll be doing that again. It's not that it didn't work. I mean, it worked quite well actually. It just seems a little bit amateurish. I'm into fiberglass and stuff now, you see. Can't have packing tape hinges, come on. The only thing I don't like too much is that, oh, that one's not doing it actually, but along the hinge line it sort of moves up and down a little bit. Maybe it was this one that was doing it. Yeah, the hinge line just seems a little bit soft. Oh, it's pretty good, huh? Well, sometimes they seem a little bit loose at the hinge line. Anyway, let's see if I can turn this over. Even on the bottom where it was scraping along on the grass, it's pretty good. Yeah, so that method is quite good if you want to keep everything light. I don't know how much lighter it would be than a thin coat of fiberglass and the right amount of epoxy, but it's a hell of a lot easier to put on and quicker and cheaper and just much less trouble overall. which is why I've done it so far for the larger areas that didn't need to be super strong. So this front section here is also taped in the same way. What other thing was I going to mention? Oh, the packing tape on its own surprisingly sticks fairly well to this foam. My initial experience with foam on tape was EPP, trying to stick duct tape to hot wire cut EPP, and it was just next to impossible. So I didn't think that this was going to go too well either. But regular packing tape on this foam, provided that you've sanded it fairly smooth so that you don't have sort of big gaps and holes in the surface. The highest I went with the sandpaper was 120 grit sandpaper, and that seems to be pretty good. And it seems like when you put the packing tape on, and if you leave it on there for quite a while, the longer it's on there, the better it sticks. Maybe the sun shines on it and that helps or something. But anyway, packing tape without that glue might work all right too, although I wouldn't do that for the hinges, of course. Well, that brings us to the end of the main part of the gluing. There's just a few more things to glue. I think the servos, the motor mount, and the tail fins will have to be glued onto the fuselage at some point as well. Speaking of tail fins, that's what we are looking at here. I just made these off camera with the normal hot wire cutting technique. So there's a airfoil section like that at the top or the bottom, and one same at the top, and that's a 30 centimeter span, so it's fairly big, probably maybe a little bit too big, but that gives me some leeway to, sand it off a little bit smaller and shape it maybe how I want. And I also did a little bit of gluing here with these. These are some of the pieces that I decided not to use, and I've stuck them together as test pieces to do some experiments with fiberglassing, trying to get these Kevlar hinges working properly, and also to see if I can get a nice finish around curves like that and try and avoid getting a sharp ridge on the leading edge, and a few experiments like that I'll be doing with fiberglassing. I guess you could say fiberglassing is gluing, isn't it? But anyway, that's going to have to be another video because I have quite a lot of work to catch up on. Actually, I've been doing too much of this lately. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll do some fiberglassing next time, eh? See ya.